Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. When my husband and I bought our first house last year in a nice suburban neighborhood, we were excited to finally have a place to call our own. The houses had decent spacing between them, everyone took care of their lawns, and there were even community parks and pools. It seemed like the perfect place to settle down. That fantasy came crashing down after we went to our first homeowners association meeting. From the minute Susan, the homeowners association president, started talking, I could tell she was a piece of work. This lady was the stereotypical Karen, blonde bob haircut, pantsuit, permanent scowl on her face. And boy, did she have a lot of rules she wanted us to follow. As the new homeowners, you must submit any exterior changes for approval, she announced in this snippy, bossy tone. That includes paint colors, landscaping, fencing, you name it. I will not have this neighborhood looking like a hodgepodge circus. Then she went into a whole speech about proper lawn care, griping about people who left their trash cans out too long or parked their cars on the street overnight. According to Susan, we needed her to keep this place from turning into a run-down slum. Oh, and she expected prompt payment of homeowners association fees too. My husband and I exchanged uneasy glances. This was not what we signed up for when we bought our dream home. Over the next few months, Susan became a thorn in our side. The passive-aggressive letters about our overgrown rose bushes, the drive-bys where she'd stop and critique something as minor as a weed in our driveway. It was non-stop. I dreaded coming home because I never knew what violation would be waiting in our mailbox. The final straw came when Susan sent us a warning letter about our unsightly stone pathway that we had installed for my elderly mother to safely walk from the driveway to our front door. According to the Homeowners Association guidelines, all walkways needed approval from the board before installation. My blood boiled as I read Susan's arrogant words. How dare she call my mother unsightly? I had had enough of her power trip. This was our house, not hers. I was going to put a stop to her antics once and for all. I talked to our neighbors and found out Susan had been harassing them too. Yard signs, porch lights, you name it. This control freak had a problem with it. Together, we came up with a plan to curb her crazed obsession with rules. First, I gathered signatures from over half the neighborhood to force a vote to remove Susan from the board. Honestly, that part was easy. Everyone was sick of her micromanaging. Next, we flooded her inbox with fake requests for inane things like approval for a bird feeder or a new doormat. I'm talking hundreds of emails from fake addresses asking this nutjob for permission to live our lives. Finally, a group of dads from the neighborhood volunteered to follow Susan around with video cameras whenever she left her house. Just a little dose of her own medicine to show her what it felt like to be watched constantly. Was it overkill? Yes. But it got the point across. By the time we held the vote to oust her from the board, Susan had been reduced to a paranoid, blubbering mess. The sight of her puffy eyes and smeared mascara almost made all the harassment worthwhile. Almost. The vote was unanimous. Susan was out. The power trip was over. With Susan gone, the new Homeowners Association board was much more reasonable. They scrapped most of the petty rules and focused on things that actually mattered, like maintaining the common areas. I could finally paint my house in peace. Was an epic neighborhood uprising really necessary to deal with one pain-in-the-ass Karen? Probably not. But after months of being treated like children who couldn't decide what color to paint our house, it felt good to band together and send her packing. The lesson here is that you can only push people so far before they push back. Susan forgot that little slice of wisdom, but I'm sure this experience taught her a thing or two about minding her own damn business from now on. As for me, I can happily say it's smooth sailing in my homeowners association now. We still have the occasional meeting for basic stuff, but there's no more nitpicking or power-hungry Karens. The neighborhood looks and feels so much happier without Susan's oppressive oversight. So let my story be a warning to any homeowners association tyrants out there. We will revolt. Step down from your high horse and stop micromanaging other people's lives before your board seat gets revoked. People don't take kindly to petty dictators telling them what color to paint their shutters. And I'm living proof that even the bossiest Karen can be overthrown if you band together. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I'm a woman in my 30s with a reasonably good corporate-type job in a field with lots of room for growth, and am recently back into the dating scene after a decade. I'm kind of a would-be a 10 if she lost 30 pounds looking girl. Beautiful face if a bit chubby, but I never have issues getting a date. I'm not well off, but I'm stable and have a bit of spending money. I live in a large multicultural city and my ex was an immigrant, so I'm open to dating people of any origin. What happened? A few weeks ago, I met a very charming man from a Latin American country, only a couple of years younger than me. He seemed very sweet, cuddly, intelligent, family-oriented, emotionally available, educated, and in a good profession back home in his country, and had a lot in common with me. Chemistry seemed amazing inside and outside the bedroom. He was honest that he was in my country on a tourist visa but hoping to stay. I made it clear I wouldn't be able to help him with that, but we'd have a fun summer fling while he was here. If he managed to stay or come back, only then would we consider a real relationship. Then the other shoe dropped. A couple of weeks and 4 dates in, during a text conversation about my work, he asked me to be his sugar mommy. I initially laughed and assumed it was a joke. He kept pushing and clearly said it wasn't. Of course, feeling insulted by this, I went off on him. He maintained it as a serious ask until I hit a nerve with my complaints about how embarrassed he should be to ask me that. Then he got angry and insulted me for thinking he was serious about it. No apology for being hurtful to me. Obviously, what I did next was take screenshots and cry about it to my closest friends. I was hurt that I was fooled into thinking he liked me and that he thought I needed to pay for a man. My friends started the fuse on what happened next. One of my friends started snooping more on his online presence. Together we found about 6 different Instagram accounts that were him using different variations of his name and different photos of himself, all uploaded in batches. On Facebook, a similar pattern, all very scammy and suspicious looking. He'd been foolish enough on one of his profiles, though, to follow and tag the employer that he was working for illegally on his tourist visa in my country. So I contacted another close friend in a local law enforcement agency that works with immigration. She looked up his file. He had a wife and daughter at home. I released the hounds after that. The friend who helped me investigate online made several group chats on multiple platforms with all of his family, immediate and extended, and friends. She released all the screenshots as well as a rant about how shameful it was. As they started blocking her, she added more people. I found his sister's phone number. She sent her messages on there too. Everyone he knows, including his wife, knows he's unfaithful and trying to take advantage of women. 30 minutes after the online bombardment started, I got a rude message from him about how I should be smart enough to know he was joking and he doesn't need to sell himself. I didn't reply. Next step? Online immigration reporting form with all the info we found, work info, employer name and address, his home address, full name, date of birth, photos, screenshots admitting to working. Usually these reports take months to be reviewed, if at all, but I gave the file number to my law enforcement friend. 2 days later, law enforcement officers visited him at home. They found him with a phone number that was issued to a local resident. All his roommates also had numbers issued to the same person, a direct link to the employer. He received a caution for trying to scam me, a no-contact order, and a flag on his immigration file that, based on his country of origin, will likely mean he can never return, as well as a strict warning to not work without authorization. His roommates also received warnings. His employer received a visit next. They found significant proof that they'd been employing him illegally, as well as multiple other people. Their investigation is still ongoing, but so far they are likely to receive tens of thousands in fines or possible jail time. The guy isn't getting deported because the government would have to pay for it, and proceedings take longer than his remaining visa time, but he's now upgraded from a flagged file to a multi-year ban on re-entry to my country. If he bothers me again, though, he will be deported as well. Hope he enjoys going back to his angry wife and the ridicule from everyone he knows. See you again, never. The next one is a petty revenge story. Way back in the late 1900s, I worked for a large grocery chain that goes by several names depending on what part of the country you are in. We had a cashier who had surgery about 3 weeks earlier, and he had a hard time standing for a long time, so he did the obvious thing and brought in a stool to rest on while he worked. The manager said he couldn't have a stool and would need to get rid of it because the company policy said no sitting while clocked in, evidently not even on breaks. The cashier tried and failed to finish his shift and ended up leaving early. He did this a couple times and was eventually fired for poor work performance. QMC. Now, I worked as a night crew stocker, which means I unload the truck, load up the go-backs, and stock the aisles. I also took out all of the trash for the admin offices. While I was cleaning the offices, I removed every chair I could find and loaded them into the go-backs truck. I also printed out a letter in bold wording to the effect of, "All employees are reminded they are not to sit while clocked in." No one knew it was me because we were always short-staffed, and I usually loaded the go-backs truck myself. The next night, the manager came in and exploded at the disrespect, and yada yada yada. He ordered a new chair, but it didn't arrive for a couple days, and no new chairs came to replace the others, just his. So I shipped it back again. This time they caught me the next day, but his chair was already gone. I was fired and they were threatening me with petty theft and whatnot. But since I had just shipped the chairs to the warehouse, they didn't really have a leg to stand on. One of my friends said that the chairs were all returned a couple nights later and everything went back to normal. Aw, man. Now that I write this out, there wasn't a happy ending. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Years back, in my early days of employment in the early 2000s, when I worked on the loading dock, we were expecting a big load of tech and products for the new office layout, some fancy upgrades, and big tech, sending the latest computers and network equipment. There was plenty of expensive equipment, and my boss told me to keep the trucks coming and going as smoothly as possible, so we had the team on with a few extras. My responsibility was to get the unloaded pallets and stack them out of the way and ready for return to their owner. Company-owned pallets have to be returned. At 6 a.m., I recaffeinated and started the forklift and began stacking the CHEP pallets ready for collection. Around 8:30, one of the main representatives came in early and parked on the dock. This was a problem because the trucks were scheduled to roll in at 9 a.m. I asked him to use the main car park, but he told me to go away and do my job. My job was to ensure that the truck drivers had unobstructed access to the loading dock. I interpreted this as, "I am too important, find a place for me." To avoid damaging the car too much, I slid a CHEP pallet under it and lifted it, placing the offending BMW on a stack of pallets. I did this while singing, "Nothing lifts like a crown" for picking it up and putting it down. We had a crown forklift, and the rest of the crew were in stitches, laughing. Many of the truck drivers rolled up and immediately knew I was on duty. They always had the best stories, and some of them had a good chuckle before making off with a fresh cup of coffee. The day was going smoothly, and we worked that forklift dry. As the last pallet came off, the tank on the forklift emptied, and after dropping off the last pallet, we got it unpacked and used a tug, a small electric cart puller, to drag the forklift out of the way. I contacted the boss and told him to get me a payment slip to fill the tank at a fuel station. He came down with the form and the representative. The representative was all smiles and thanked us for the purchase of bulk computers and hardware, but that changed when he spotted his BMW. He was furious and threatened my job, demanding that my boss fire me. I just looked at my boss and said, "We should look at the security cameras." When my boss reviewed the security footage, he pointed out that I had asked the representative to move and park elsewhere. Then he looked at me and said, "Thanks for another day, see you tomorrow." The representative wanted the car down immediately, but I said, "We can't. The propane tank for the forklift is empty and gas delivery is tomorrow at 6 a.m. My boss handed me the payslip for refilling the forklift tank and told me to get the gas in the morning. The representative spat some more obscenities and said this would be tagged onto the bill if his car was damaged. He claimed it wouldn't take much more than a postage stamp to send his boss the footage of him obstructing their loading dock. Then my boss looked at him and tapped the sign that said, "This is a loading dock. Park at your own risk. We are not liable for towing or moving your vehicle. Fines apply." The next day, after detaching the tank from the forklift, I lugged that thing to my car and drove off to get it filled. Upon returning with a charged tank of liquid work juice for the forklift, I started it and got to moving the BMW down from its perch and ready for the representative to collect. At 6:30 a.m. he hadn't arrived, so I decided to place the car in the nearest accessible parking spot on the street, a ticketed spot since our car park wasn't open yet. It was the only safe place available. I contacted my boss and told him, "Call the representative, it's ready for collection, and it's in spot XXX on the parking meter line." He responded with an okay. Then I got to work sending off the pallets for the day. It was a half-shift day for me. As for the representative, he did manage to collect his car before it was ticketed for not feeding the meter. I heard through my boss that the representative got chewed out and lost his sales bonus for acting rudely. I really miss that boss. The next one is an entitled people story, So, for those of you who remember me, I had made a post here a little over a year ago about a guy who wouldn't accept free food and demanded money instead. I have since left that job, and I am now a delivery guy for a pizza franchise that pays significantly more than my barista job. When I changed jobs, I assumed that it would be smooth sailing from there. For a short period of time, it was. Friendly work environment, super chill boss, and to top it all off, the customers were absolutely pleasant. But with all jobs, you are bound to run into a Karen or two. My time came yesterday when a Karen came into our store. So one of my co-workers, who we'll name Steve for obvious reasons, and I were chilling out in the front of the store. Now, where I work, the amount of business we get fluctuates. So while we'll be extremely busy one day, we'll be super slow the next. On this particular day, it was slow, other than a singular delivery order and a couple of carry-out orders. So our boss comes into the store and after seeing how slow it was, tells us to feel free to make food for ourselves. Steve and I are stoked since neither of us had eaten all day. Steve makes himself a medium pizza with cheese, and I make my own pizza, a medium with pepperoni and bacon. We both put our pizzas in the oven and wait. About 3 minutes after the pizzas go in, the front door of the store dings, signaling that a customer has entered. So, right from the moment she walked in, I could tell that this wasn't going to be a pleasant encounter. She sauntered into the store with the classic Karen hairstyle, a look on her face that said, "I'm better than you, and you know it," and who I assume was her teenage son in tow. So I look over at Steve, then back at her. Before I could greet her, she says, "I'm picking up an order for Karen. Make it snappy. I don't have all day." So I go over to the heat rack and find her order. That's when I saw on the receipt that the order hadn't been paid for yet. So I put the 2 pizzas that she ordered on the counter and told her the price. With a huff, she paid, and I thought that was the end of it. But no, when it comes to Karens, when you think it's over and done, they will constantly find a way to continue. So the lady asked for an extra ranch dipping cup. Now, one of the rules we have about the dipping cups is that we are not allowed to give extra dipping cups to the customers for free. The only time the dipping cups are free is if they actually came with the order, which in this particular case they didn't. So I grab the ranch cup, put it on the counter, and tell her the price, which was literally a measly 69 cents. She looks at me and says, "Are you kidding me? You can't just give me the cup for free? You have plenty already." To which I responded, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but no, I can't." Now, one thing I've learned from all the other Karen-related stories that I've heard is that Karens absolutely hate being told no for any reason. So when I tell her that I can't give her the cup for free, she started yelling and swearing, saying things like, "Are you going to charge me to use the bathroom too? Or maybe you're going to make me pay for extra napkins too?" At this point, Steve and I are getting pretty annoyed, and that's when my boss, who I found out later on was actually the MCO of the company, comes in and asks what was going on. As we're explaining what's happening, the Karen suddenly goes completely off topic, talking about how our customer service was terrible. She then mentions that she actually owns her own pizza restaurant, where allegedly they make over 500 pizzas per day. I'm not sure if she was being truthful or just blowing smoke, but my boss looks over at her and without skipping a beat says, "Well, if you own your own restaurant, what the heck are you doing here? Throwing a hissy fit over a 69-cent cup of ranch?" The store got so quiet that you could practically hear a feather fall. I look over at the Karen's son, who is trying his absolute hardest not to laugh. Steve and I were containing our own laughter as well. So then Karen hurls more insults before grabbing her pizzas and leaving the store with her son. Steve and I share a laugh before going back to enjoy our pizzas. Later on that day, the store gets a call. It's the Karen's son apologizing for how his mother behaved earlier that day. He then explained that she's constantly doing that wherever they go. She loves causing drama and starting trouble for people. I tell him no worries, and that I knew what her gameplay was the second she walked in. We chatted for a bit before saying goodbye and ending the call. So a bit of a happy ending to what was honestly a very amusing and slightly annoying encounter with a Karen. The next one is an entitled parent story. When I, 31F, had my wedding 5 years ago, we decided to host it at my wife's, 31F, mother's house. We dressed up the garden and it looked magical. We were able to have a stunning garden wedding with about 100 guests, relatively inexpensively. On the big day while getting set up, my entitled mom was buzzing around, making a complete nuisance of herself. She was trying to change how tables were arranged and allocated, and bothering both my wife and me while we were getting ready for the ceremony. Our friend, who was an unofficial manager of the wedding, was doing his best to keep her satisfied, while also keeping her from bothering the brides. When it came time for speeches, I made mention of people who specifically helped and people who were part of the wedding party. My sister was mentioned because she was a part of the wedding party, and my MIL was mentioned for partially funding the wedding and hosting it at her house, investing a lot of time and effort. In the end, my entitled mom did not get mentioned because she did not help, but rather hindered, and has honestly never done anything to support us. When it became clear she was not getting mentioned, her family started shouting at me from across the garden, reminding me to mention my mother. Out of surprise and shock, I made a quick mention, but I honestly had no idea what to even say. It made no sense to me to mention her. Shortly after, she left in tears, and she took her entire extended family with her, about a quarter of the guests. Most of them didn't even say goodbye. It was a devastating amount of drama for what should have been a magical day. My dad handled it well and comforted us both. They are divorced. I don't regret not mentioning her even a little bit. All it did was highlight that she can't be trusted to participate in our lives in any important or meaningful way. The relationship has never been the same since, especially since she outright refused to apologize to my wife, even trying to compare her behavior with my wife being withdrawn at her family gatherings. For some reason, the entire extended family tends to pretend she doesn't exist. Totally bizarre. I'm glad my wife still loves me so much despite my insane mother. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.